So I'm at Oak Lawn Cemetery in Sturgis, Michigan, and it's about that time again for another historic walking tour put on by the Historical Society. So come along and join me.
Welcome to the Legacy Tour. How many have been here before? You've done other tours. Yeah. If you haven't, I think you'll really have a good time today. So if you'll follow me, we'll get moving.
Greetings and welcome to my final resting place. My name is Emma D. Young. The D is for my maiden name Dietrich, while you may recognize my married name from the auditorium that my estate helped to build. The Sturgis-Young Auditorium and Civic Center, now known as the Center for the Arts. For more than 68 years, the venue has brought people together in the spirit of community and fun through art and entertainment, just as I hoped it would when I was finalizing my affairs at the end of my life. My apologies, I'm getting ahead of myself already. I was born north of Chicago in a town called Genoa Junction near the Wisconsin-Illinois border on April 5th, 1864 to John and Catherine Dietrich. While little record remains of my early years, in 1891, at the age of 27, I married the love of my life, Lynn Young. Lynn was born 1 year before me in Union City, Michigan to George and Susan Young, just a few years before they relocated their family to Chicago. In 1885, Lynn's parents bought a second property here in Sturgis on the corner of Centerville and West Chicago Road, then known as the Newhall Mansion. Lynn and his family spent many summers at the property, and after his parents passed away, the property was left to Lynn and his brother David. Lynn loved that red brick mansion so much that he bought out his brother's share and renamed it Lyndhurst Mansion. The glorious Italianate mansion, complete with a cupola and iron picket fence, stood prominently on that corner for over 100 years. We would spend a lot of our summers here, dividing the rest of our time in Chicago. Lynn's parents rest beside us as they so love Sturgis. Lynn graduated from Lake Forest University and went on to become an acknowledged authority on commercial law and a successful teacher in Chicago for many years. Lynn was known for being a dedicated and untiring worker, and his advice was sought on a multitude of civic problems throughout his career. Dividing our time between Chicago and Lyndhurst, we enjoyed riding around town with the finest of driving horses, pulling our ornate carriage, and we were the first family to have an electric automobile that ever graced the streets of Sturgis. Those were lovely times, even though Lynn and I never had any children to share them with. Several years after retiring, stress had taken its toll on Lynn, and in November of 1922, at the young age of 59, my hard-working Lynn succumbed to his illness. I would continue to live alone in Lyndhurst for the remainder of my life, maintaining that property that my husband was so fond of. After Lynn's passing, I would often open some of our acreage for free public gardening. Sadly, the house no longer stands, though it was considered for the construction of the auditorium at one point. As I got older, I worked with Raymond Dresser to establish the intended distribution of the wealth that I had accumulated after Lynn's passing. Despite our earlier splurges, I saved and invested my funds wisely. I had big plans for what was to happen after I left this world. I passed away from my illness quietly at Sturgis Memorial Hospital, April 19, 1952. I left $1,000 to my older brother, Louis Dietrich of New York City, and the remaining $433,000 was bequeathed to the city of Sturgis for the purpose of providing a suitable and adequate civic auditorium. However, no good deed goes unpunished, as they like to say, and my brother contested my will. He alleged that I had been coerced into leaving my fortune to the city. He asked for a jury trial, but settled for $3,000 in exchange for relinquishing all claims to my large estate. The planning began immediately after the settlement, as my will specified that the city must act within 1 year of my death, otherwise the funds would be redirected. My brother's claim took up 6 months of that year. I wished for the institution to be more than an opera house. I wanted consideration to be given to the women's clubs and service groups based on mine and my husband's love of civic organizations. On May 15, 1955, the Sturgis-Young Auditorium and Civic Center was dedicated, built on land donated from Sturgis Public Schools, and with the funds from both mine and the Sturgis sisters' estates. The featured speaker, Philip Lovejoy, pronounced the building beautiful, but not too beautiful to use for the benefit of every citizen in the community. This was something I had always wanted for the people of Sturgis. Designed with extra rooms available for community purposes, including the youth, which I held in the highest of esteem. Having no children of our own, my greatest gift to the city was the Sturgis-Young, that mid-century modern masterpiece on the corner of Nottawa and West Streets, known by many as the crown jewel of the city. A symbol of love for a hometown that comforted me so much throughout my life. Thank you for visiting my final resting place and for enjoying all that Sturgis-Young Center for the Arts has to offer. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're going to hear about Stella Sturges, so this young lady.
Hello and welcome. My name is Stella May Sturgis Taylor, and I was born in Plattsville, New York in 1856 to Albert and Jane Sturgis. I moved with my family, my parents and older brother Charles, first to White Pigeon, Michigan, and then in 1860 we settled in Sturgis. It was a small village at that time, but as the years went on, I watched it grow into something amazing. I was fortunate to be able to attend school in Sturgis, and I had the honor of being the first and only member of the senior class of Sturgis High School in 1877. Our home was a lovely house on Nottawa Road that still stands to this day, looking just as it did when I was growing up. I lived there with my family, which now included my younger sister Clara. My brother Albert was a teacher, but by 1900 he had become a lawyer while still living at home. My father first worked for the Vogt furniture factory, but then he joined two other businessmen to form the Sturgis-Augsburger Furniture Company. After my father passed in 1904, my older brother Charles took over his role in the company. Several years later, however, he sold the family stake in the factory, and the Sturgis name was dropped from the company. Sadly, my brother passed away in 1920 by the age of 64, never having married. My beloved mother passed 9 years later. After my parents and brother passed on, only Claire and I remained to look at the house and look over the business of the family estate. However, we were never truly alone. We had each other and a large circle of friends, and I had many other ways to occupy my time. I was a longtime member of the Whist Club, a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and a very active member of the Sturgis Women's Club, for which I once served as parliamentarian. Another organization for which I hold near and dear to my heart is the Order of the Eastern Star. I became a member of the Olive Branch chapter in 1876, and I was given lifetime membership in 1933 and a gold certificate in 1941 for being a member for 50 years. I never thought I would ever marry, especially at the age of 60, until I met a wonderful widower, Walter Frank Taylor. We were married in Marion, Indiana in 1930, and we lived together at the family home in Nottawa. He worked for the Augsburger Furniture Company. Sadly, on August 5th, 1934, my beloved sister Clara lost her battle with cancer. To honor her memory, I gave a gift of $50,000 to the city of Sturgis to finance a home for the nurses that worked at the hospital. It was named the Clara Sturgis Memorial Nurses Home, and it still stands today in front of the hospital. In January of 1943, I started to feel unwell. I was diagnosed with a heart disease, and suffered for 10 long months as treatment was not helping. My husband admitted me to the hospital at the beginning of June, and I passed 20 days later of heart failure. After my death, I willed $500,000 to go to Sturgis to maintain the upkeep of the nurse's home and other civic projects. Upon the death of my husband, our house was to be turned into a home for mature women to live at, not to be a nursing home. It was named the Jane A. Sturgis House for my beloved mother. Money from the estate of my sister and I was to go to the construction of a new civic auditorium in Sturgis. Along with the estate of Emma Young, the Sturgis-Young Civic Center and Auditorium, now known as the Center for the Arts, was built and still serves the city today. Thank you all for hearing my story and visiting my resting place.
Hello, my name is Helen Augspurger, and I was born in 1896 in Ligonier, Indiana, to Robert and Ada Jeanneret. I grew up, as any girl of that era, where I had to work at home when I was not attending school. I graduated from Ligonier High School in 1914, as did my parents, and both of my parents and my older brother there in Ligonier. My dream was to teach young children. And so after high school, I traveled to Chicago to attend the Pizzoli Froebel College for Teachers. This school specialized in training people who wanted to be kindergarten teachers. I also took special work at Columbia University and also Western Michigan University. Then I went to Three Rivers and I began my career as a kindergarten teacher. While I was home visiting my family one day, I happened to meet the most charming young man. His name was Howard Augsburger. We fell in love. And we were married in 1924 there in Ligonier. We moved into my home in Three Rivers, and I continued to teach. And Howard had business in the tire and gas companies. About 1930, we decided that we would move to Sturgis. And so we did. And Howard was appointed by the Congress to be the Postmaster General here in Sturgis. So impressive. Oh, yes. Now, after that service was ended, he worked for the Sturgis Savings and Loan. He eventually became the Executive Vice President. So, with my husband gainfully employed, I had the freedom when school was not in session to travel and just enjoy myself. So in 1949, I got on the Queen Elizabeth II and cruised to England and Luxembourg and Belgium and Switzerland, Italy, and then of course France. It was so wonderful. In 1956, Howard and I took a flight and we went to Martinique and to St. Thomas. We were always jetting here or there, having adventures and just enjoying life. As I'm sure you're wondering about my boa, it is ostrich feather. You ever seen ostrich feather? Yeah. It didn't come from Europe. It came from a store in Chicago. The boa belonged to my grandmother Jeanneret, and it was given to me upon her passing. It's a great accessory to my outfits. Ah, I love it. Oh, yes. I was always wearing the latest fashion, the most sensational styles. Oh, it was so fun. Ah, I tell you, I did not dress like your stereotypical teacher. No. But sadly, in 1971, my beloved Howard passed away. But I was determined to continue his legacy and help children along the way. Though we didn't have any children of our own, I loved children and I just wanted to do everything that I could for them. So in 1972, I gave $250,000 to the Sturgis schools so that they could create the community swimming pool. I also gave an additional donation of $50,000 to update the tennis courts. Howard liked tennis, you see. And then that same year, I gifted the property that I had owned at 109 Pleasant Street to the St. John's Episcopal Church so that it would be created a memory garden for my Howard. Of course, I was always a very active individual in Sturgis. I loved all the activities. Why, I was a Lady Elk of Sturgis, and I was in the political club. Oh, and of course, I was at Klinger Lakes Country Club, and then St. John's Guild. Oh, and my most exciting thing, I was the charter president of the Magazine Guild for the hospital. Isn't that amazing? Wow. I was honored for all my civic work by the Exchange Club when I was awarded the Book of Golden Deeds. And I was also the Citizen of the Year, thanks to the Chamber of Commerce. I passed away at my home on Cornelia Street in 1989. In my will, the Sturgis Public Schools received $70,000 for the upkeep of the swimming pool and the tennis courts, of course the Augsburger tennis courts, right? And a similar amount was also put so that they would get that same amount every year. I was good with math. I also instructed that there be a scholarship for any Sturgis High School student that wanted to continue their education at Glen Oaks Community School. The college, yes. Thank you for listening to me today and my story. And may I suggest that you think about what kind of legacy you can create for the betterment of your community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of myself, C.W. Hirsch, I would like to ask my friends and neighbors to join me over into the shade.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Hello friends, C.W. Kirsch here. I was born on September 1st in 1867 in Freedom, Wisconsin, to Nicholas and Marie Kirsch, both whom were immigrants from Prussia, which is now a part of Germany and Poland. They came over here when they were young children. I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and we lived in Appleton. I attended Appleton High School. Now, while I was in Appleton High School, I wanted to start my own business. So I borrowed a little bit of money, and I started a business where I could work on gadgets and the such. Well, by the time I graduated high school, the business had failed, so I had to work real hard to pay back all that money. Well, in October of 1897, I married the beautiful Clara Waldo at her mother's house in Appleton. And we had 2 sons, Guy and John. Now, for a few years there, we were traveling around as I worked at various companies, expanding my mechanical knowledge. We were living and working in Chicago when the Iroquois Theater fire occurred. And that was an unspeakable tragedy where many women and children died because the theater curtains caught fire in a standing room only showroom. Well, immediately I went to work to try to figure out if I could make a fireproof curtain. Well, I did. And the first fireproof curtain was hung in the McVickers Theater in Chicago. And to this day, it is a requirement for all theaters to have those curtains for safety. From here, I moved the family to Three Rivers, where I started my first business, which was the National Tool Company. Now, like most businesses at this time, it went belly up. So while I was sitting there mulling over, trying to figure out how to keep my family from impoverished with no money and no business of my own, something caught my eye one night. I noticed that the curtain weight was making the cord drag from the curtain wire. And so immediately my engineering mind went to work and kicked into high gear. And then in 1907, I had founded the Kirsch Manufacturing Company, where I manufactured my idea for the very first flat curtain rod. I knew this was going to take off to be a whole focal point for people's windows, so I patented the idea. And well, the rest is history. So in 1908, I moved the company to Sturgis because it offered a lot better manufacturing, transportation, and a lot more money. So we opened up shop on Prospect, just south of the shoreline of Michigan South Railroad line. In the fall of 1908, Claire and the boys went to Appleton so I could start the new business with working and sleeping and eating, and that's all I could really do. And it was really hot. It was best for them to go visit the family at that time. Though I did miss my darling Clara so. I mean, to the business world I was CW, but to Clara it was Charlie. In our letters during our separation, I kept in touch to keep her up to date on trying to convince this woman named Myrtle Logan to come work for us, which she eventually did and stayed. She actually retired in 1946. She's one of our longest employees there. We started with 2 salesmen, and I hired Myrtle's sister, Carol Logan, to come work in the office as well. We only had $38,000 to our name from sales. To say that money at the time was tight would be kind of an understatement. I woke up early every single morning, went to the plant, started a fire, and came back home for breakfast. With the success of my curtain rods, the Kirsch Manufacturing Company went on to offer a variety of other items to adorn our windows. Over time, my factory actually became a small city within of itself. We had bowling alleys, we had skating rinks, swimming pools, baths, we even had a club room. Over the years, I patented more than 20 items, one of which were the doorknobs on the elevators and also the fireproof curtains, which I had mentioned before, along with some hardware and window treatments that made the Kirsch Company one of the largest manufacturers of curtain rods, Venetian blinds, and the like. By 1925, I had manufacturing plants in US and Canada. I built this company by a solid belief of a good relationship between employer and employee. At that time, my employees were having a rough time trying to find homes due to pricing or just non-availability. So we decided to go and build houses on Myrtle, Laurel, and Wilson streets, and I made them available to my employees at cost. 77 of my employees took advantage of that, and some of those still stand today. In 1929, I donated 160 acres to the Boy Scouts to use for their own personal use. And today it is now known as Camp Fort Hill. One day while I was out at Klinger Lake, I was looking out there and I was like, wow, I could do something to this country club, make it a lot better. And I did. So I invested a lot of money into the country club to make it a good quality recreational area. And I also went and put in an airport here in Sturgis called Kirsch Field, where I'd have many of my business adventures. However, in 1933, I was admitted to the hospital, became very ill, and was released several days later from suffering a heart attack at my home in Klinger Lake, and I passed away on September 14th. The following years, my son deeded the airport to Sturgis as a memory of myself And each of two took to overrunning the business, and they all had their own children, and they had grandchildren. So my grandchildren couldn't be your friends and neighbors still here today. It is with hope that they all live by this motto. It is possible to evolve a plan whereby everybody wins and no one loses, profit to all and loss to none. And may you find that this be true as well. And if you all will stay right here, my good friend Grobhiser right here would like to say a few words to you as well.
Good day and welcome. I'm William Charles Grobhiser. I was born in 1860 in the town of Freeport, Pennsylvania, to German immigrants Frederick and Hannah Grobhiser. My father moved us to Leechburg, Pennsylvania when I was just a lad. He worked as a cabinet maker and woodworker. And boy, as soon as I was old enough to hold a chisel in my hand, I followed him right into the cabinet making industry. When I was 23, I married the lovely Elizabeth Smith in Leechburg. The following year, we welcomed our only child, a daughter we named Zulu. 4 years later, I moved with my wife and daughter right here to Sturgis, Michigan in 1887. We lived in a grand house on the corner of Chicago and Jefferson. There were other grand houses on the block as well, owned by fellow furniture manufacturers Gerald Walton and Dr. John Moe. The houses no longer exist, but if you go to where the Chamber of Commerce building is, that's where our houses were. Not long after settling in Sturgis, I, along with other Pennsylvanian John Crosby, formed the Grobhiser and Crosby Furniture Company. I was president and general manager of the factory until 1908, when we consolidated with the cabinet makers of Grand Rapids and rebranded as the Grobhiser Cabinet Company. I was named president, and many other furniture companies established themselves right here in Sturgis. But it was due to my pioneering business efforts that Sturgis became the second largest furniture manufacturing city in the state of Michigan. In 1908, I was instrumental in helping the American Newfoundland Lumber Company in Grand Rapids organize their logging and lumbering operations on their property in Newfoundland. I continued to work on multiple business ventures in Grand Rapids and owned several pieces of property there as well. While running my cabinet company in Sturgis in 1912, I sat on the company board of the Pantland building. That hotel today was reopened in 1981 as the Amway Grand Plaza Hotel. I also served as one-time president of Sturgis National Bank, treasurer of the Manufacturers Building Company, and vice president of the Powers Theater Corporation, both in Grand Rapids. In my lifetime, I was a member of many organizations to which I rose high in the ranks. Organizations such as the Knights Templar of Michigan and the Free and Accepted Masons of Sturgis. To say I was active and committed, that would have been an understatement. In September of 1918, I was diagnosed with pernicious anemia. It's just as bad as it sounds. It weakened me so badly I had to forego many of my day-to-day activities. However, that didn't stop me from running my business or visiting with friends or upholding my many civic duties. On August 27th, 1919, I passed away at my home, surrounded by my loving wife, Elizabeth, and our daughter, Zulu. I'm flattered to know that many businesses closed up that day, the day of my funeral, out of respect for me. My last will and testament was over 12 pages long. But there were so many people that benefited from my estate. A majority went to my wife, of course. I stated that upon her death, my daughter should receive yearly payments of $100,000. No small sum of money in that time, and even by today's standards. After taking care of my family, the next order of business was to give $50,000 towards the construction of a new hospital, something our town desperately needed. The funds were split between construction and maintenance. I named several trusted friends and fellow businessmen as trustees to oversee all things related to the construction and building of the hospital, including Frank Waite, Martin Augsburger, James Robinson, Jay Stanton, and James Packard. I further stated that upon the death of my wife, the $100,000 property I owned in Grand Rapids and all funds and interest associated in that city were to go to the Grobhiser Memorial Association for the continued support and maintenance of the hospital. For years after my passing, my wonderful wife continued my philanthropic work, ensuring that people who could not afford a home would have the means to either build one or purchase one themselves. I led a very prosperous and exciting life, and I never took a single day of my 59 years for granted. I hope after today you all will take with you the understanding that a life in service of others is a legacy that will outlive your time on this earth. I would like to thank you again for coming and visiting my final resting place.
I am pleased to share a bit of my life with you today. I was born on January 28, 1901 in Litchfield, Michigan. Is anybody here from Litchfield, Michigan? Well,
We know where it is.
it's about 20 miles north
Yeah.
of Coldwater. I graduated from Litchfield High School in 1918, and then I went on to study law at the University of Michigan. While still in college, I met and married the love of my life, Miss Lola Juckett. We were married in May of 1923. In 1924, I received my law degree and we moved to Detroit, where I practiced law for 3 years for AAA. I moved to Sturgis after forming a partnership with fellow attorney Theo Jacobs. That was in 1927. Well, that partnership didn't last very long, as Theo was appointed circuit judge in 1931, which happened to be the year that our son, Raymond H. Dresser Jr., was born. He was joined by his sisters, Gloria and Marilyn. So I remained a solo practitioner in Sturgis for the next 25 years. That was until my son, Raymond H. Dresser Jr., joined the firm in 1956. I represented a number of influential clients throughout my career, many of which you'll know when you take the tour today. Ranging from local businesses such as the Royal Easy Chair Company and the Allsbrook and Jones Furniture Company. And this was the last of a fine line of home furniture manufacturers in Sturgis. I served as counsel for many financial institutions such as the Citizen State Bank, the First National Bank, and the Sturgis Savings and Loan Association. Interesting fact, the Sturgis Savings and Loan Association was initially run out of a roll-top desk in Judge John Philander's office, which was adjacent to my office in the Masonic building. In fact, records were kept in a floor safe in between our two offices. You see, at that time, life was fairly simple. Well, I got to know the residents and elected officials quite well in Sturgis while serving as city attorney for a period of about 16 years. My involvement with the Michigan State Bar was illustrious, as it culminated with my election to president in 1958 and 1959, which today you can no longer have consecutive presidencies, so I feel honored. Being entrusted by Stella Sturges Taylor and Emma D. Young to administer their individual estates was a great privilege. Stella Sturges's will was admitted to probate in 1934. However, the contents of her will were unknown to the public until 1943 at her passing. That was because during World War II, the construction of public buildings was prohibited. Emma Young died in 1952. Her wishes were undisclosed, but she instructed me to prepare her will in such a way that the city of Sturgis would receive the majority of it, expressly for the construction of an auditorium. Do you know the name of that auditorium?
Yes.
Well, yes, you do.
We just came from there.
By combining these two estates, we were able to make the Sturgis-Young Auditorium a reality for the entire community, along with several other impressive projects at Sturgis Family Bequests. My assistance with the auditorium, the community pool, and the Augsburger tennis courts instilled within me a great sense of civic pride. I was happy to hold a position which endeared me to the Sturgis community, such as president of the Klinger Lake Country Club. Again, many of those you'll meet today were members of the Klinger Lake Country Club. And I was a member of the Mason and the Elks. Leading the Dresser law firm with my capable son, Ray Jr., was a great source of pride for me, as I knew the citizens and the city of Sturgis were in fine hands. And 1968, my wife and I traveled down to Hollywood, Florida. It was here that I suffered a heart attack and died at the age of 67. My devoted wife, Lola, brought me back here to my home in Sturgis, where I rest here today. And I thank you so much for visiting with me today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Greetings, my name is John Vogt, and this is my story. I was born in Coldwater, Michigan in 1888 to Diane and Jeannie Vogt. My father had traveled from Germany and settled in Coldwater, where he opened his first greenhouse and flower shop. He later married my mother, who was from nearby Batavia. I was the second of 5 children born to them, 3 brothers and 1 sister. While growing up in the greenhouses, we all did our part. We loved working with Father all the time. It was an exciting job and something that I quickly knew would be my livelihood. My brothers were all continued in the greenhouse business, and my sister became a teacher. After graduating from Coldwater High School in 1908, I enrolled in the University of Michigan, but I only stayed for a single year. I left after that to apprentice in Iowa in a greenhouse, figuring I could learn more with my hands in the dirt than I could by just from a textbook. I stayed there and then moved on to Rochester, New York, and apprenticed yet once again. It was a great time in my life. I was learning so much about horticulture and felt I'd expanded my knowledge enough to return home to try my luck at a greenhouse. With my family's greenhouse in Coldwater, I decided to settle in Sturgis, close enough but far enough away. I found a wonderful piece of property that would be great for this venture. Plenty of room should I decide to expand it in the future. And you know what? If you look just beyond these trees, you can still see that building today. One of the original greenhouses still stands there. A lot of people thought I was foolish. Why would I not put my business downtown in the center of Sturgis? Well, after watching and looking for a spot to put this store, I realized how many people visited the cemetery every Sunday to pay their respect, all with hands full of flowers. So what better place could I have than to be next to the cemetery? I opened Vogt's, and by the way, I opened Vogt's October 6th of 1911. This is actually my original journal in my penmanship. I traveled back to Rochester, New York in 1914 to reconnect with the woman I had courted when I was there interning, Olive Disney. Yes, she is related to the famous Walt Disney. She was a stenographer, and I had courted her there when I was there before, but didn't feel I had the means to start a family. So that year, Olive and I married in her parents' living room. I brought Olive back to Sturgis, and eventually we started our own family, having 2 sons, John Jr. and Gerald, or many knew him as Jerry. Both of the boys were excited to work in the greenhouse with me, and I'd hoped that they would carry on in the family tradition with their own greenhouses someday. While working to improve plants and increase business, I served the community well by sitting on the Sturgis Board of Education from 1920 to 1926. I served as president for 1 year. I was a member of the Sturgis Exchange Club, serving as president in 1928. I later was honored in 1971 as a 50-year member. I worked long and tireless hours to try to find ways to improve my plants. Days, years, decades, and finally in 1930, 2, after 15 years of really working with a particular species, I had done it. I created a hybrid version of the flower known as a cyclamen, the common plant that's in front of me. This plant that I had hybridized was more durable and had a double petal from the original plant. People started to take note of my creation, and in many publications it was hailed as a great addition to the plant kingdom. I was a member of the Sturgis City Commission from 1936 to 1940. During that time, I was featured in Popular Science magazine. Imagine that, the man from Coldwater who had traveled to the west and to the east and returned to Sturgis in Popular Science magazine with a one-page article with photos providing information on my methods for preserving cut flowers. But what really made a difference was that mention of my double cyclamen in that article. That small one-page article in that magazine would start something great for me that would change my business and my family. In 1938, I was awarded a Certificate of Merit from the Chicago Florist Club. I was elected Vice Mayor of Sturgis and re-elected the following year. But I wasn't done yet. I still had more to do. I received further awards for my plants during the annual meeting of the Michigan Floral Association of 1938. I was awarded 3 gold awards for my primrose, my fringed cyclamen, not to be confused with my double cyclamen, and a single cyclamen in the specific colors that I had hybridized. But my curcuma that year, a plant related to ginger, received the second highest award at the annual meeting, a blue star. What a great tropical flower. Not something typical to Michigan, but something I love to have in the greenhouse. By 1947, I received orders for my double cyclamen from all over the world, but one of the proudest and farthest places that it traveled was Johannesburg, South Africa, where a florist had requested a dozen plants. By the time I retired in 1959, I had expanded the greenhouse with 2 additional greenhouses with over 4,000 square feet of growing space. I was a member of the Knights of Pantheas for 60 years, and I was awarded life membership in the Sturgis Elk Lodge. Before I retired, I turned the business over to my son, Jerry. Well, as you have heard, I feel I had a very accomplished life, very fulfilling in many ways. I went to my final resting place in 1976, happy with all that I had accomplished in my lifetime. A happy marriage, a wonderful family, and a son running the business that I had started from one root, and knowing in my heart that it would continue for decades. And in that tradition that I first started, or realized that that was a perfect spot to have a greenhouse, I would like one of you to present a flower somewhere in the cemetery to continue that tradition. Thank you for visiting my final resting place with the large urn back here planted, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your tour.
I was born in the famous blizzard on March 20th, 1888. While the blizzard made the news, my birth did not, but news became my life. I graduated from high school in Wabash, Indiana in 1907, and that summer was a cub reporter for the Wabash Plain Dealer. That fall, I enrolled in DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana. During college, I worked for the DePaul Daily News. I even became editor my senior year. After graduating college in 1911, I moved to Chicago for 4 years, where I worked as an advertising copyright for the R.R. Donnelly printing firm. My first wife, Helen Haines, and I were classmates and married in 1913. Helen was not born during the blizzard, but her father was the fiery evangelist, Billy Sunday. Perhaps together we were ice and fire. Our son, Mark Paul Haines, was born 1918. We shared a good life together until Helen passed away prematurely in 1932, at the young age of only 42. Despite my heartbreak, I met and married my second wife, Lorna Doone Jackson Haines, a few years later in May of 1935. Lorna was an opera singer with the old Chicago Opera Company. She'd studied in Europe and traveled the country with various theater and drama tropes. She decided to settle with me and live here in Sturgis. For a time, Her mother, my mother, and my son were all living together. No parent wants to outlive their child, but unfortunately, my son Mark's death preceded my own, and he passed away in 1957. I would leave this world behind in 1966, at the ripe old age of 78, and my beloved Lorna would outlive us all to the age of 91, passing away in 1981. Most have heard the journalistic adage of who, what, where, when, and why. I've told you the who and when of my family. Now let me tell you the where, when, and why of the main focus and passion of my life. I was the proud owner of the Sturgis Daily Journal for 47 years, from 1915 to 1962. I'd always been interested in local news, and running the journal was the highlight of my life. In 1915, as the new owner and publisher, I arrived in town, too inexperienced to be appalled by the antiquated equipment with which I was expected to produce a newspaper twice a week. The press at that time was a thundering demon known as the drum cylinder. Flat sheets of paper were fed in by hand, and an experienced producer could produce about 1,000 sheets an hour. We had nearly 1,000 subscribers at first, and very few pages compared to editions many years later. But we never, in my 47 years as owner, missed an edition of the Sturgis Daily Journal. My staff over those decades were as dedicated to the local news as I was. We overcame power failures, sleet storms, machinery breakdowns, and other catastrophes beyond the control of man. And we'd always gotten out the paper, regardless of hours and effort. When I came to town with my first wife, my father-in-law had a house built for us at 802 East Chicago Road as a wedding gift to Helen. It was the first in Sturgis to have a garage. During one of his visits in 1926, Billy Sunday preached to a crowd of more than 1,000 at the Sturgis Presbyterian Church. By comparison, the Sturgis Journal had more than 8,000 subscribing families by 1959, when we celebrated the centennial of the Sturgis Journal. As I wrote in the commemorative October 3rd, 1959 edition, people have been born, lived to a ripe old age, and died, and the Sturgis Journal has recorded the beginning and the end. Among journal subscribers are hundreds of men and women who have read the journal for 50 years or more. That 1959 centennial edition was a year-long labor of love. We filled 120 pages to the brim to commemorate its 100th year as your hometown newspaper. 12 tons of newsprint for the 8,100 subscribers, and an extra 2,000 copies that had been sold in advance. A single copy weighed 1 3/4 pounds. In 1959, we had 32 youngsters who delivered the paper in Sturgis and another 30 in local communities. We had recently started delivery in rural areas, and 5 motor routes delivered to some 1,200 rural homes. And, as I wrote in 1959, the journal looks forward to the day when it can rely on airplanes to speed up delivery. It's fair to say that I was a dedicated businessman and took great pride in my profession and community. I was among the founders of the Klinger Lake Country Club, a member of the Michigan Press Association, and a founder of the Michigan Home Dailies, an organization that included about 30 smaller newspapers in the state. Over the years, I had many opportunities to sell the journal to outside interests, mostly chains who would have run the journal under absentee ownership with a hired manager in charge. That would not have been good for the company or the community. It was not for sale. But on January 1st, 1962, I sold the journal to Harold S. Pringle. He lived in Sturgis and worked under me for 10 years. He had my complete confidence. In 1965, we moved to La Jolla, California. But the newspaper business was my life. We didn't become successful overnight, but the monumental task was worth it.
Perhaps you, a family member, or someone you know has worked for us.
And I am Grace Franks, married to Newell since December 15th.
To the parents of Peter Willis and Agnes Franks. Now they went by the name of Willis and Ida. Like most rural families, we came from modest means. But I still managed to graduate from Rome City High School in Indiana in 1927.
Around that time, Newell and I met, and we decided to start a life together. And we were married on December 15th of 1928. Over the years, we had 3 sons, Richard, Lawrence, and Tom.
Now in those early years, I used to work various odd jobs in the Fort Wayne, Indiana area. Then was eventually hired as the janitor for the Brimfield Public Schools. In 1935, through a fellow classmate of mine, I got a job working for the Michigan Gas Company here in Sturgis, Michigan, selling appliances. In 1936, I decided to move the family here officially, which eventually became our home. Now, it turns out I was a pretty good salesman because before World War II, I set all sorts of sales records because I knew if you don't sell, you don't make money.
I was a wife and mother first and foremost, but our 3 sons grew up quickly, and over the years I joined many organizations to fill my time. Newell and I were members of the First United Methodist Church of Sturgis, as well as the Clinger Lake Country Club, because Newell loved to golf.
Oh, and hunt and fish at Clinger Lake.
That's right.
I was also a member of the Sturgis Kiwanis Club.
And I was a member of the Kiwana Queens, the Pocahontas Temple of the Pythian Sisters, the Order of the Eastern Star, and the Sturgis Hospital Medical Guild Scholarship Fund. Also, the Sturgis Women Club. And do you remember the Friendly Circle Dance Club? That's been a long time, you might not remember, but I still love that club.
My feet still hurt. While Grace was attending to the domestic aspects of our lives, I started working for the Laughlin Tool and Die Company in 1942. Then, in 1944, things started to come together. 3 of us from the tool and die industry put our heads together and we started Burr Oak Tool. Now, it was a nearby Burr Oak, Michigan. Because we did it there because the rent was cheap and we could afford the building we were in. Now, we quickly outgrew that building and in 1946 officially moved Burr Oak Tool to Sturgis. I may have thought by the time I was 35 years old, I had worked a lot in my life. But as it turns out, I would spend the next 60 years going into the office every day. Finally stopping by the age of 95. Now, it gave me great privilege when I would walk in, and even in those advanced years, my employees would snap to attention because to show the respect from the hard work I had put in. It was a great privilege knowing that my hard work had paid off and that people respected that. Some people would even use the word workaholic, but I knew I wanted a better life for my family, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get there. Now, the employees also knew what I expected. Work started at 7 a.m. and then went to 5 p.m. every day. Now, at 11:25, the bell rang to get ready for lunch, and then at 11:30, the bell rang so you go for a 1-hour lunch. After lunch, the bell would ring at 4:55 p.m. to get ready to go home, and the bell would ring again at 5 p.m. to go home. Now, not 4:55 p.m., but 5 o'clock sharp. Then on Saturdays, we would work from 7 a.m. to noon, making it a mandatory 50-hour work week. Punctuality, precision, practicality. 3 words to work and live by. Now, during that hour lunch, you could usually find me over at Patterson's, having lunch with my closest employees and closest customers. Later, when Patterson's eventually closed, you would find us at Welch's. Now, sadly, neither one of those restaurants are still around at this time.
But as you know, Herman's restaurant was my favorite. And I kept busy around the house and tended to our extensive flower gardens in the summer. I also loved to play cards and would do so whenever I could. At dinner, many of our family members would join us. But my most cherished memories were when our 3 sons and their wives and all of us were together. That generally didn't happen other than in the summer when Dick would come and stay at our Clinger Lake cottage. We knew what it was like to come from meager resources, but we believed in working hard to earn our way and respected those who understood and showed the same initiative. So we both agreed that sharing some of our hard-earned means to assist those who needed an opportunity to rise above was a cause we both believed in. Top of our list was the local community as well as the local schools. If we saw a need, we would rise up and support it. And because of that, Newell was voted voted as the Sturgis Citizen of the Year in 1982 for all of those contributions. That was a very proud moment for all of us. He also really loved talking to the high school students and would find any opportunity that he could to engage with them.
You know, I also served on the Sturgis Board of Education and was even president for a time. Because now education is vital to the growth and health of any community. That is why we supported it so ardently. Now, we were fortunate that Borough Tool prospered. That way we could be very generously minded.
That's right. And for Newell's 90th birthday, there was a huge celebration at Oak Lawn Park. All of his staff were in attendance, and many of them individually stood up amongst everybody there and told of how he personally impacted them, as well as his contribution. That was a very proud moment.
You know, I don't know who they were talking about, all those nice things they were saying. You know, I'm pretty sure they were thinking, how long is this old goat gonna last for? Like I told them, I don't know how long, but we have to ship. If we don't ship, the whole place will go to pot. Now back at it.
Ever the taskmaster.
Truth be told, it was a privilege to have so many tried, trusted, and proven employees over the years work for us. So therefore, we try to make Borough Tool as a pleasant a place to work for as possible.
In my last days, I was surrounded by my Newell, my children, my grandchildren, and even my great-grandchildren. And I was very happy and proud to call Sturgis my home with my beloved for 73 years.
And I was proud to leave Sturgis in the hands of my son Larry, grandsons David and Newell, grandson-in-law Brian McConnell, and Jim Lindsley round out the 5 that now serve as directors of that company, a company which still thrives to this day.
Thank you so much for visiting our final resting place and hearing about our contributions to the Sturgis community. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So that program was put on by the Sturgis Historical Society, and I will put the link in the description of this video if you'd like to check them out, maybe give them a little bit of financial support. They are a great organization working real hard at preserving history. This is the 3rd tour that I've been to that I've had the opportunity to film. And one of the interesting things is the Civic Players that performed at this cemetery tour were all connected with the Sturgis-Young Center there in Sturgis, Michigan, which was mentioned quite a bit in the presentation today. So a lot of history tied in with the people that are involved with the program. But if you like today's journey through history, this video, please support the channel by hitting the like button down there and subscribing and sharing the video with others. It always helps. Leave a comment, tell me what you thought. And until next time, thanks for watching.